Hi, everybody. Phil Friedman from Friedman Adventures on YouTube. I had such a great time at the Turner's Rod and Reel Club. Those folks over there are fantastic. I got to introduce my good friend Brian Nguyen, and he is coming up next with a seminar that will help you catch more and bigger fish. So, without further ado, here's Brian.
Well, thank you very much for having me and appreciate your time. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible, and we'll open up to questions towards the end, at the end of the workshop here. I got the newsletter and I got a chance to see, when Denise asked me what it was that I wanted to talk about, it was kind of going back and forth on a couple of things. But in getting ready for the new year, and the new year of fishing, one of the areas that I wanted to address is fighting fish on the rail. That's become something that's very common, something that you see an awful lot of. You go on boats now, and that's pretty much it. Back in the day, we used to fight fish with harnesses and doing it with white knuckling it with our arms. We don't do that anymore. We are now using the boat to our advantage. And the thing is that you hear the words all the time. It says the rail is your friend. The rail is your friend when you're fighting big fish. The fact is that if it was that easy, everybody be doing it and everybody be landing fish in a real efficient amount of time. It is a technique, okay? And done wrong, just as any technique, it's going to create all kinds of different problems for you. Okay, the longer we're on fish, the more chances we have of losing these fish. Okay, so the whole key to fighting a fish on the rail is to apply as much pressure on the fish as possible, but the rail is actually, in fighting a fish on the rail, it does save the human body. We don't have to exert that much of our strength into it anymore. So there are ways to do it, and I'm going to go over for you guys this evening, okay? So I like using my son's Elmer's white glue, and I make up all kinds of different things here, but this is my fancy signage for the evening that I've used at other clubs with Phil. So I got to start with, I have what I call, it's one rule and 3 parts to fighting fish. The rule is that line is either coming in or going out. It is never to be neutral when you are fighting fish. The longer you have that fish in the water, the more chance you have of losing them, okay? I'm not asking everybody to go, you're not going to out-muscle them and you're not going to just pull like a madman, but you have to just, if you keep that in mind, that line is either coming in or going out, you will have a much better chance of landing these fish in an efficient manner, okay? So I said 1 rule and 3 parts. 3 parts. Make it real simple. You have to have an acronym when you come on and speak to a fishing club, right? So I just, 3 parts. CAP, C-A-P. I'll go through all those parts with you one by one and explain to you why they all kind of fit together when we're looking at landing fish using the rail. And I'm not just talking about big fish. The rail is being used on overnight trips, 3/4 day trips. You're using it to fight yellowtail. You're using it, we even use it to wind rockfish from deep from 600 feet, okay? But these are get this going here. Go one by one on CAP. The first one, C, okay? Confidence. Confidence is going to, if you don't have that down, you're not going to land these fish efficiently. Why is it important to land them efficiently? Well, obviously, the longer they're in the water, like I said, you have a good chance of losing them. But if you think about it from a bluefin perspective, okay? The times that you're able to fish for them or find them actually biting, it's very limited. And you can ask those 2 guys back there. They know. You can have a 1-hour window, 2-hour window. You hook 1 fish, and you have 1 guy who either drops in with really light line or he doesn't understand the technique, and he's on the fish for 2 hours. There goes your day, the entire day. Okay? So if everybody can kind of get on the same page of understanding how to fight these fish on the rail, everyone on the boat is going to be able to benefit from it. Right? So, C, confidence. What does that mean? Confidence in your rigging abilities, confidence in your knots, confidence in your line, confidence in your rods, confidence in your reels. If you're one of those anglers, and there's nothing wrong with it, I used to be that way, but if you're one of those that changes rods and reels and buys new one every month, there's really no telling what exactly your setups can do. So your confidence in those setups are going to be really limited, okay? So as far as brands of line, I mean, there's hundreds of them out there, and we all have our own personal preferences. So whatever it is that you fish, fluorocarbon, mono, stick with that one. Build that confidence in it. You find something you don't like, find something better, of course you want to move on. But I'm not one of those right now in this stage of my fishing career to go after the latest and greatest toy. Okay, I like to I want to stay with what I'm very confident in. Okay, because if we're not confident, when it comes time to really put some pressure on the fish, we won't do it. I don't know how many times you end up you're watching people battle a big fish, okay, and the deckhand or the captain comes up and asks you to push the reel to get some more drag on there, and people are kind of like they're looking at the crewman, so like, whoa, what's going on? You know, I don't want to lose the fish. Well, if you don't have confidence in your rigging, you don't have confidence in your gear, you don't have confidence in your knots, in your crimps, in your hooks, in your jigs, it's not really going to help, and we won't be able to get to the next two stages without confidence. Okay, I'm confident enough to use my wife's pink highlighter to highlight confidence, so I'm there. The next portion of this, of fishing the rail, A in cap, C-A-P, A would be angles. Okay, when you're fishing the rail, it's all about the angles of the rod and where that fish is in relationship to the rod. Okay, what the key thing to understanding playing the angles is to keep the rod bent as much as possible. All right, because that's going to put a lot of pressure on that fish. I see people using the rail sometimes and they have the wrong angle and the rod is pointing straight at the fish. All you're doing now is you're just begging that fish to come your way to turn the head to be able to get any line on them. That works in certain types of, in other ways and with other types of tackle, but when you're talking about fishing the rail, which is what 95% of all the sport boats recommend, well, 100% of all the sport boats recommend now, it's not going to work that way. You're just going to sit there. I mean, all you're going to do is let that, I like to say that the fish was born and raised in salt water. He don't need to be in there any longer. Okay? So now, if we're talking about the angles, we have to understand the boat that we're on. Okay? I fish one boat and one boat only, but that doesn't mean it's any different than if I jump onto another boat. What you'll see me do a lot of times, if I get on a boat that I haven't been on, or maybe I haven't been on it in a long while, I'll take a stroll around. Okay? And I want to see exactly how the boat is laid out. I want to know where I can, at every point, every area of that boat, how I can maximize the amount of pressure on that fish versus, and minimize the amount of pressure I put on me. Okay? So if you're stuck in, some boats are really low, have low rails, and if you're in the stern, you're going to have to figure out the right angle to keep that rod so that you can fight, so you can continue to fight that fish. Otherwise, you can try to white knuckle them, but I mean that's again, you're gonna have that fish soaking in the water for much longer than you really need, unless you're really that strong. Okay, so understanding the angles is critical. Take a stroll around the boat. Figure out how the boat rises as you get up to the bow. Understand where the anchor lines are, right? So that way you could whatever you need to do to get over and under anglers. Okay, so angles are a critical thing here. Keeping the proper angle on your rod so that there's always a bend in it. Okay, so you're putting the most amount of pressure on these fish. Then, of course, learning the positioning of the boat and where you are on the boat so that you can apply these angles and apply maximum pressure on these fish. Okay? Then we have P in this. P is for positioning. Okay? Positioning not just of the angle, not just of the rod, but the positioning of our bodies, the positioning of how the relationship between the foregrip of the rod and the rail. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys the positioning of the rods and what we do to fight fish effectively on the rail. I brought two different setups here. The reason that I brought them is because typically when people talk about rail fishing, it's always geared more towards big fish. But as I said, you can now, we're not discovering now, but what we're doing now is we're using it on even lighter tackle on any game fish. Okay, so I brought one here that would be geared more towards our bigger bluefin tuna or bigger tuna in general, an 80-pound type of setup. Then I brought my 40-pound setup. These would be the two, you'd use this one more on a tuna trip, but this 40-pound setup, you'd be using it on sea bass, you'd be using it on yellows, anything like that, okay? Want to talk about positioning. When you're talking about your the positioning of the boat, the layout of the boat, unless you're on the outer limits that has the tubular, aluminum rails, the majority of the boats that you're on, there's a flat surface. Now, obviously, I've got a bad example here with this chair, but we're just going to pretend that it's flat, just like the rail of a boat. Okay, you have, you have two positions where the rod, when you're fishing the rail, where the rod should be. Okay, you have the outer rail, which is where the rod spends most of its time, and you have the inner rail. What I see a lot of people confuse, sometimes I'll see them mix the two up. They'll spend a lot more time on the inner rail and the outer rail. Now what I mean by that, and I'll show you. Phil, I promise I won't pull the plug out, okay? But the inner rail, okay, the outer rail is when we have our rod tip pointed down into the water, okay? And this is where, when that fish is straight up and down, when the battle really begins, this is where you're going to spend the majority of your time, if not all of your time. What I see people do is what you should do, okay, the rail is flat, right? And what you're doing when you lay the rod onto the rail, on your foregrip onto the rail, you're just going to lower your body. You want to lower your body down, use your legs in this, okay? And you want the rod to be flat on the rail. That's the key here. However you want to position your body, whatever is comfortable for you. But you want the rod to be flat on the rail. I see people trying to play seesaw, and they'll come up and it's almost as if they're using they're kind of coming down like this, and then they turn the handle and you're using it in a real funky way. If you are using the inner rail and you are fighting your rod just to get it up like this, as if you were pulling on there, there's a couple of things that are happening. Number one, you're wearing yourself out prematurely. Why? Because a lot of your strength, a lot of your energy is being exerted into keeping the rod from twisting. There's an awful lot of pressure that's going on there, and the effect that you want, it's not happening. Using the rail is dependent on the rod, okay? On the recoil of the rod. And what that means is that the rods these days, graphite composite, carbon, whatever it is that they make, mixed in with fiberglass, UC, Seeker, CalStar, they have recoil. And what that means is that as the rods bend under a certain load, they start to want to straighten themselves out, okay? So when they straighten out, that's when you can wind and start taking in line. If you are playing the seesaw game, thinking that people are trying to mimic the old school pulling on it, well, now you're doing this. You're trying to keep the rod stable. You're trying to keep your reel stable. You got to focus now on turning the handle of the reel. You can't even pay attention to the tip of your rod to see it coming up, because you're being fooled by the fact that you are doing most of the work. And really what it's doing is, it's when you use the inner rail when the fish is straight up and down, okay, it's no longer short pumping. Okay, so what you're doing is that you're dropping the rod tip so far as you turn the handle, you're allowing that fish's nose to come down. And once that nose comes down, he's going to take off again. And now you've just added more to the battle. Okay? So what we want is, when the fish is straight up and down, we use the outer rail, we point the rod kind of down towards the water, and we just drop down and we level it to the rail, keeping it nice and steady. Okay? And the rod bends. And as it comes up, we can now wind back down and just keep on working them up. There's no need to exert yourself and do anything more beyond that when that fish is straight up and down. Okay? Because if you do, you're just going to end up in a world of hurt. Excuse me. Now we're talking about the inner rail and the outer rail. Well, Brian, when do you use the inside rail? What do you use that for? Well, that typically is if that fish has been dogging you. Typically on a bluefin, they're very interesting creatures, even big ones especially. They kind of let you know when you're not putting enough pressure on them, because what they do is they'll take off And they'll start to run way out there, and your line is at a huge angle. Okay, and what they're going to do now, once they get way out there, number one, it makes it very difficult for you to try to bring them in, because now they're sideways on you. So you're pulling them in. You're trying to force them to go in a direction that he naturally does not go. Okay, so trying to pull them in sideways, it gets really tough. So when that happens, and you can't pull them in, what a lot of times we do is we use the inner rail and we drop down on our knees if we're able to. And now, when he's out there, we use the inner rail, and the rod is angles, bending the rod. Kind of makes sense, right? So now we've got a good bend in the rod, and we just lower ourselves and we watch the rod tip. We don't do anything more. Okay, as the rod bends, it comes up, and we start turning the handle on them. And what we find is that when we do this, because it's putting constant and consistent pressure on the fish, they actually now, you kind of break its spirit, and he turns his nose and he starts to come at you. So when he does that, it becomes a little bit easier to start to bring him in. But then, of course, the work starts when he goes straight up and down. Okay, that is really the only time that we use the inner rail, and that's when we kind of involve our bodies into the whole program. Okay, but inside rail and the outside rail, do what's comfortable for you. If you can't get on your knees, I've seen some guys sit. I've seen crew members put towels, wrap up towels and put it underneath them, and they just kind of sit, or they bring a bucket over and they just sit on the rod, or they sit on the bucket and they keep the rod at an angle like this, and they just keep on turning. It's just like that. They watch the rod tip, they're watching it, it's bending, and then it comes back up, and they take as much line in as they can. Okay? Now, talk about angles and position. For me personally, I don't get up and down onto my, on my knees and back up as quickly as I should anymore, as quickly as I did. So now, what I have found a lot of times is if I'm in the stern, in the back of the boat, and the fish is straight up and down, I can't get down on my knees, and I'm not very mobile. So what I'll do is I'll stick my leg, I'll have it in between the rail. You have that opening. I kind of stick my leg up like this, and I use my leg as the rail. All about positioning and angles, right? We're still keeping a bend on the rod, yes? We're still doing the same thing. We're resting it now on our leg. No need for me to do anything other than to keep it flat. The rod bends, it comes up, you turn the handle back down, and you start winding on that fish. Okay? Want to talk a bit about we all have the 2-speed reels have come a long way, and we're using the 2-speed reels are getting smaller and smaller. One of the things that I see a lot of people doing when they're fighting fish is they get kind of stuck in low gear. When you stay in low gear, I have a line, I've used it on the Friedman show. I said, you guys know what low gear is for? It's actually to get you back into high gear. Okay? Certainly you can sit and be on low gear and just keep on turning your handle. But that fish, there's a couple of things that happens through the course of a battle. If you're fighting the fish up on the bow and he beelines it to the stern, we have to do what's called walk and wind. So imagine, for those of you that are fishing, we'll throw a boat out there that everybody knows, the XL. It's a 124-footer. You're at the bow, okay, and you have to now, he beelines it to the stern, and you walk down that path, and you turn the handle, that's literally 124 feet you just gained for free, okay? But if you don't, if you are stuck in low gear, you're not able to keep up with that fish. So now your line is slacking off, and when it does that, as soon as it comes tight again, you got another run on your hands, and you've just added another 20, 30 minutes to the fight. Okay? You could lose them too on that initial surge when they just kind of get really upset, or not upset, but they want to tease you for not really putting on the pressure on them. And that's it. And here we go. You're in for at least another 20 to 30 minutes. Okay? So low gear and high gear. There is a time for both of those. I find myself fishing pretty much normal, not pretty much, but I stay in high gear for as long as I can. Because regardless of what it is, or what size the fish is, and what kind of drag I have, in high, at least I'm able to get line on the reel. Okay, low gear is used to get you back into high gear. I can't stress that enough. Everybody lives in low gear. They think that button is like the savior. As soon as they hit it, then they, oh, it's really easy. Well, I see them hitting it. I'll give you an example. One of my friends on our trip, he hooked the fish on a jig at night, and the fish took off when it went out. It was kind of tough for him to get the handle turned, so as that fish was out, he kept it in low gear. It charged the boat, and as soon as he tightened up, it spit the hook. Okay, you have to stay tight with that fish. So low gear and high gear, there's a time and a place to use them. And like I said, low gear, I can't stress that enough. Low gear is designed to get you into high gear. Okay, I'll show you the mechanics, the body mechanics of laying the rod on the rail, because this one's really important. You can choose to keep it under your right arm or your left arm. It doesn't matter. What matters is what you're most comfortable with. Okay. So the mistake that I see people make, and you'll see this a lot if you're going on any trip, any species, when people have it on the rail, they actually still believe that they have to put their hand they have to hold the foregrip of the rod and keep it steady, when they're actually focusing on the wrong area to keep it steady. What makes the rod twist and turn? It's not the rod, and it's not the fish, and it's not the drag. It's a combination of those that actually add up to the weight of the reel. Make sense? Okay, the weight of the reel is what's causing the teeter-totter back and forth. If you're holding on to the foregrip and you come down like this, and you're under, let's just say 30, 35 pounds of drag. Hell, even on 40-pound tests, 10, 12 pounds of drag, you'll notice that you exert more of your energy in trying to keep things steady than you are focused on turning the handle. Okay? So the key to fighting fish is gaining line and keeping line. And if we're concentrating, if our energies and our focus is all on keeping the rod steady because we're holding it wrong, we're not really it's not mission accomplished at this point. Okay? So, what I like to see people doing, again, I'll show you both left arm and right. Okay? When I have for me personally, it's more comfortable to have it under my right arm. And what I like to do is I keep the rod, I actually put my hand on top of the reel. Okay? It allows me to do a couple of things. One, it keeps things very steady. Okay? So now as I come down, you see I don't have to play the balancing act. My guides aren't moving around, my rod's not twisting. Okay? Hand on top of the reel. Two, because my hand is on top of the reel, sometimes even in full drag, okay? Now we're talking like 100, 130 pound tackle. Even in full drag, we're still not able to gain anything on these fish. Sometimes they're just so heavy, and you got to imagine when they're straight up and down, where again, fighting them, they're laying like this. They're laying sideways. We're having to we're trying to pull them up against water pressure and then the weight of the fish and things like that. So it's really an awful lot of work to get these things to move. Okay, so I will apply more pressure with my hands. I'll clamp down on the spool, depending on what size line and depending on what size hook I have. But I do that, I have more control over how much drag I put on with my fingers at that very moment than I do with the reel. Because I could certainly slam it all the way up in the full, but the issue is that fish decides to take off one more time, you're in a world of trouble if you don't recognize that 2-second warning that they do give you when that time is coming. Okay, so hand on top. I like to put if I'm pushing it under my right arm, left hand on top of the reel, and all I'm focusing on is getting the rod level with the rail. Okay, rod bends, it's going to bend down. Wants to recoil, comes back up. I start to turn the handle, back down again. Okay, rod bends, it comes up, turn the handle. Now everything is nice and steady, and your focus is going to be on turning the handle on your reel. Okay, remember the part about confidence? Kind of going back there. You're not confident in your hooks, you're not confident in your knots, in your rigging, in your crimps, in your rods, and your reels. When it comes time to really put a maximum amount of pressure on that fish, you won't do it. Everybody, I've heard it, and it goes on and on. If you look on forums and you look online, I can fish 50 pounds of drag. No, I mean, I've watched. I've been on boats. if you guys really want to know, you guys like really want to know about those top long range guys, you know, how much pressure they put, give Cal a call one day, Cal Sheets. Ask him. He does all their reels. He can tell you who fries up drag washers and who doesn't. Okay? But got to have confidence. Okay? Under the left arm, okay, this is where a lot of people are very comfortable. Okay, under the left arm. What I like to see people doing, without pulling the wire again, I like to have people holding the reel on the side like this. Okay, you're gripping the side of the reel. Again, I've seen people left arm, same thing. They're keeping their hand on the foregrip, trying to fight this fish, and the whole rig is just going sideways. It's just teeter-tottering, and you're not focused on turning the handle. You're focused on keeping the thing steady. So if you keep your hand on the side of the reel, same deal. Now, very steady. We've eliminated what makes the rod twist and turn. Now, we come down, wait for it, rod bends, comes back up, we take our cranks. And we just keep on doing that. We don't put any more strain on us and on our bodies. Where the strain is going to be on our legs, which is certainly one of the most stronger parts of our bodies for most of us anyway. Okay, so that's on the heavier gear. So Brian, what's the difference when we start using 30 and 40 pound? I only brought it to show, but I'm about to be a smart aleck here and tell you there is no difference. Same. Okay, same. Everything applies, right? I mean, you could be battling a 150 pound bluefin accidentally by throwing 40 or 50 pound in. Or you can be battling a 30 or 40 pound yellow. Doesn't matter. The same principles apply. The same twisting applies. The same hindrances apply. The same opportunities apply. Okay? So again, on light gear, same. Okay? Lay it on the rail, and that's it. That wraps up the presentation, guys. Does anybody have questions on fighting fish on the rail? He asked if I have my hand on the rail, am I guiding the line back on? Just so you guys know, the guiding the line back on, it's important only, honestly, it's really only important when you haven't got a bite and the captain says to wind them in, gang. Okay? Because otherwise, think about it. If you're in low gear, okay, and you drop down on the rod and you start taking a couple of cranks, you're only bringing in a couple of feet at a time. So it's not like you're winding a jig from 200 feet deep like you're fishing for yellows and you're just cranking until you get bit. There's a nice steady flow. And you know what? The line has a tendency to like to stack up, especially under load. It just kind of falls into place. Now, having said that, it falls into place by how well you wound it in when the captain said to wind them up, gang. If you wound a big old ball in the middle of your reel, and you start to and you don't guide the line back on to kind of to move it around and redistribute the wealth, I should say, you're going to end up piled up in the middle. And now, what do you have to do? Anybody know what you guys do at that point once it's stuck? Free spool. You know what free spool does? Another 30 minutes, right? Okay. So that's a very good question. We do worry about it, but like I said, I pay a lot of attention to how I wind the line back on to make sure that it's nice and even. And of course, nothing packs the spectra onto your reel better than having a fish on the other end. You know, you went into a shop and you spooled 550 yards on your reel, which is what I have here on this Talica 20, my 80 pound setup, and I've caught lots of bluefin on this. And it looks like I can get 100 more yards on there because it just packs it on that much better.
The next question was, when you get a little bit older and your knees are kind of shot, how do you get down low to pull on these fish?
I have one of my friends that I fish with is 6'4", and he has problems with his knees as well. A couple of things that he has done. He's modified his rods. We're talking about big tuna. He's actually now using lighter rods because at that height, he can't get the right angle to keep the rod bent. So on a lighter rod, he's able to keep it bent, and he doesn't have to necessarily get super way low on that just to keep the rod bent. Right? Does that make sense? If you have a lighter rod, it's easier to keep the rod loaded at different angles than it is on a heavier stick. So in your case, you can certainly try, if your knees are really shot, If it's just more from a mobility standpoint, if you're stuck in the stern, if you're in the bow, and depending on the boat that you fish on, if it comes up really high, then you're golden. But if you're in the stern, you can certainly try the method that I use, which is putting your leg up there. You'd be surprised how strong, I mean, this muscle is. And you just got, it's not, again, don't worry, it's not about constant motion. It's really just if you just think about that, if you just remember that and keeping the rod nice and level, it bends, it comes up, and you just turn. I can fight fish and speak to the deckhand or the crewman and not have any strain on my voice, because I'm not trying to go over and beyond what I'm really supposed to do. So you can try that. You can try a softer rod, and it stays loaded a lot better, or it bends a lot easier depending on the position that you're in. So
The angler also wanted to know, should he drag his rod down the rail?
I wouldn't do that. I had a friend of mine, kind of real short story here, but I had a friend of mine using a spinning reel. I think he's recorded the first ever cow on a long range boat using a spinning reel. He machined a piece of metal that would go around his rod so that he could lay it on the rail. And I know that there were some portions of that fight where he actually drug it, and I don't think the boat owners were very happy when they started seeing certain gash marks on there. Dragging the rod on the rail, it's really not a problem. Honestly, when it becomes a problem is when you start to chew up your foregrips. And now you're going to have to change them all the time. So even, on my rods, I have this expensive 3M cold shrink. It's not resistant to dragging on the rail. It'll get wore out real quick doing that too. So on a rod that's going to bend a little bit more, like Steve, my buddy Steve fishes, it's actually easier to hang on to them and lift them up off the rail. Number two, if your drag is that heavy that you can't lift up and let people go over and under you, the secret to that, back off just a little bit until it is manageable so that you can go over and under and do things like that. Successful fishing is not just worrying about what's on the end of your line. It's knowing what the other anglers on the boat are doing and how you're going to go about getting over and under and around various obstacles. Okay?
Denise Davis wanted to know, how long should a rail rod be?
I used to say on a rail rod that I don't understand what a rail rod is because all rods can be laid on the rail. But as you start to see, rods are getting longer and longer and longer. The first rail, we were fishing 6.5 footers or 6 footers, and that was for those of you that remember the CalStar Model 655 TSS, that was designed as a rail rod. It's a 5.5 foot, 100-pound stick. Then we went to 6 footers. Then we went to 6.5s. And we went to 7s, and we were pretty comfortable at 7 for a very long time. Now we go 7.5, and there's 8. Question comes sometimes, what's up with the length, and why is it that rods are getting longer when we're fishing the rail? Number one, it keeps the line, it keeps that fish from going underneath, or it controls them a little bit better to try to anyway prevent them from going underneath the boat. Number two, if they are actually well behaved, the longer rod puts the fish further out there, because when they're doing their circles, they might have an opportunity to wrap around the prop and things like that. Okay? And three, something that people don't actually think about. The more material that's in the rod, actually there's more of it fighting the fish, right? So you've got 7 foot, 7.5 footer, you've got an awful lot of rod that's helping you fight this fish. So yeah, there are now 7s and 7.5s is where the standard is for a rail rod, and I see more people going towards that 7.5 foot rod for those particular reasons. I just wanted to kind of share real quick something that I've been doing. I shared this with Denise, but I started a little group, if you will. I have 2 passions in life outside of my wife and my son. One of them is fishing, and the other one is cigars. I started a group called the Cigar Afition, F-I-S-H-I, Aficionados group. And we're not a club, but it's just kind of getting people together. You know, internet forums are a very interesting thing. You have 85% of people that are lurkers, 15% are contributors. People don't want to post questions. People don't want to ask anything in fear of getting some kind of real snooty answer or any type of attitude. So I wanted to eliminate that. I presented this to manufacturers, boat captains, crewmen, and deckhands, and all anglers, of course. Fishing clubs are absolutely welcome. If you want to get more people into your club, come on by to one of the events. We're spreading it out all across Southern California. Okay? And we're going to do these at it's cigar smoking, and we're going to enjoy a cigar, and we're going to talk fishing. If somebody comes up with a question for me and they say, hey, Brian, I want to learn how to tie a bimini twist in mono. Great. I'll bring a spool of mono, and we will go through that with you at the event, all while enjoying a cigar together. Okay. I'm going to pass these around. This has this just kind of has where I am from a social media standpoint, but it also I kind of threw this out here. This is the second time that I've come here and spoken to this club, and I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoy you guys. Thank you very much for your attention. What I'm doing is I'm calling this the Sport Fishing Search Engine. And what that means is that for you guys, I put it up here, and I'll just read it to you and then hand it out to you, but it has my contact information on there. And I wrote exclusive to Turner's Rod and Reel Club members, the Sport Fishing Search Engine. Send me your questions on fishing tackle and or techniques, and I'll provide you with the most up-to-date information on what you need to have a smoking good time on the water. All right? And then the final thing, I always have to throw this in. You're looking at my shirt and it says, ask me about Medicare. A lot of people ask me, Brian, what exactly do you do for a living? I'll tell you real quick. I'm a professional Medicare benefits advisor. And I work with people to help them utilize, understand all of their benefits, and help them to transform those benefits into a financial tool. Okay? So, right now, we're in the process of another enrollment period. What I like to say is if you are not of age for Medicare, but you have your parents or aunties and uncles that you're responsible for that are in the Medicare age, if they're not calling me, they're calling you. And if they're calling you, that red button, you're going to wear that thing out real quick on your phone. Okay, so I'm here to answer questions and I'm here to help. Whether you currently are in your Medicare or you are about to get Medicare or you know somebody in Medicare. I don't charge a dime for conversation. I'm a question answerer when it comes to Medicare benefits. Okay? I'll pass these around. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.